Welcome to Asshat Analysts, the debate game show where the points definitely matter and we take things way too seriously. My name is Josh Johnson, and I'm joined here with my roommates, Nathaniel Jackson.
Yo.
And Kyle Jennis.
Howdy.
Stay tuned to find out who truly is the king of pulling random facts and arguments right out of their ass.
Good evening, afternoon, or morning, everyone. Welcome to Asshat Analysts.
We're recording our Parlay episode today. It is a good one. It's the first of our book episodes. So once a month, we will do a book review for our Parlay episode. We'll, talk about the book, rate it out of 10, argue about why it's a horrible book or a phenomenal book. So
Or somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. So let's go. Oh, wait. First of all, let's introduce Teddy, our guest.
Hello.
Teddy. This is actually our second time recording with Teddy, but it's the first time you're hearing Teddy because we did a weird thing, but that's okay. So today we're talking about The Outsiders. It's a book that most children are forced to read in middle school.
If you live in the United States.
In America. And it's a book I despise. So I'm going to go ahead and start. I rated it a 4.2.
Ouch.
Yep.
Yeah. Slow.
Out of 10.
Out of 10. Yep.
Yeah.
It's either really good or really bad.
Yeah. What's the scale? I was pretty generous. I gave it a 7 out of 10.
Very generous.
I give it a 6.8.
And I gave it a 6.
So I'm kind of the outlier here.
You're the outsider.
Dang it.
I hit both. Dadgummit. All right. Woo! Why? Okay, who gave it the highest rating?
I did.
All right, Kyle, why'd you give it the highest rating? Why'd you give it a 7?
Well, I don't read a whole lot for leisure, and I haven't in a long time. And for me, this book was a really easy read. Like, it took me only about 4 hours to read. I basically just took an afternoon. I was like, all right, I'll read it. And it just went. Like, I looked up, and all of a sudden, it was the evening, and I was like, wow, I got sucked in so easily. And it was a good story. Like, it's a very well-crafted story that's it's easy to follow. There are a lot of good characters. They're all very laid out well, at least to me. And there are obviously a specific few characters that obviously carry more about them. Like, they have bigger themes that they discuss or anything like that or relate to or whatever. That was pretty much it for me. The only thing that I didn't really like about it was it kind of introduced a lot of the characters like right out the gate at the beginning, which unfortunately reminds me of a certain DC movie that is god awful. And I can guarantee all of us in this room and anyone and everyone who listens to this knows which movie I'm talking about.
Yeah. That's a huge, big issue I have early on. It's just an info dump of characters.
Yeah.
The descriptions kind of fall flat, and a lot of them are kind of similar. So it's like, okay, I have a vague idea. I know the names because the names are very unique. And it's like, but I struggle sometimes to remember the description to the person. Which one was soda poppin'? Which one is who was that? It's just a big info dump with no real story to introduce the characters. It's just like, oh yeah, by the way, there are these characters.
Yeah, and I did notice that they all kind of like at the beginning, Ponyboy gets jumped by a couple of the rival gang members called Socias. And then all of a sudden, all these guys are here, and I'm like, wait, hold on, where did they all come from? But for me, that was the biggest gripe. I mean, I didn't notice anything else that was bad or anything. Like, keep in mind, I don't read a lot. So if a book can keep me in and just have me read it all the way through in a couple hours, cool, good with me.
Well, so this being said, I did give the book a 6.8. But to kind of rebuttal against your argument that you just made, I do think that some of the characters were not given very descriptive information about, and I think that's on purpose. So like the Socias and the others,
Greasers.
Yeah. Well, no. So in this book, because it takes the perspective of somebody who is a greaser, We get a lot more detailed descriptions of the greasers themselves, Ponyboy, Soda Pop,
Dairy,
Johnny,
Dally,
exactly,
all those guys.
the main crew, and then we see, although there's not a ton of descriptive words about what they look like, there is a lot that we get from their interactions with people, in the way that they talk to Cherry and
The other
whatever
girl.
whatever the other
Someone
girl's
with
name
an
is.
M.
Yeah.
Marsha
Marta or something. Yeah.
Marsha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so it is the way that they interact there, the way that they interact with each other, the way that Ponyboy describes his relationship with Dairy, with Soda Pop.
Even with Johnny too.
Yeah, and I think that's where it goes, and I think
But here's
it's poignant. I think it's poignant that we don't get a lot of descriptions about the socias that they interact with, because the whole point is that they just view each other as, you're a member of that group, I know exactly who you are.
Yeah, and I don't want a description of the socias. The description of the greasers is shit. I'm sorry, but it's a dump of information. Oh yeah, this is the names of all of them, and it takes so long for you to actually learn about them through those interactions that I didn't actually know what character was what until like the sixth chapter
Episode.
the 6th or 7th chapter, and it's like, okay, now I think I remember who Soda Poppin' is. Like outside of Ponyboy and Johnny, like I was struggling. I was like, which one?
I mean,
Who was
granted,
Dally?
those
Who
are the
was-
only two that you really need to know much about.
Yeah, but
No.
all the other greasers are just a jumbled mess. And yes, you do eventually, through their interactions, start to be able to puzzle it together. But the description and the introduction of those characters, of all the other greasers who are supposed to be important to the story, is horrible.
Just remember better.
It's really bad. No,
No, and I mean that's what it is. I think so. For context, did you read it all in one sitting?
yes.
Okay. Because I think that was one of the benefits of...
In fact, I actually read it twice. So I
Okay.
read it in one sitting, and then I re-listened to it through an audiobook.
Okay. Because I do
And
think...
it was garbage both ways.
Yeah. And I think that's probably just something that we're going to have to disagree on, because it is, like, I liked the fact that we got, like, a little bit of information about them at the start, like, hey, this is the whole crew, and then you do kind of, as the story progresses and through Ponyboy's interactions with them and observations of them, because he really is, he's not a super outspoken kid, but he gets to a point where he is kind of observing and watching things around him. And so I think the way that we learn about them through observations and through their behavioral differences. And I also like that I think part of the reason that it was done that way is because you are supposed to immediately assume that they're just, they're greasers, we know everything about them. But then through these interactions and through the way that they react to things, you're able to see that kind of deeper layer. And that's what the entire book is about you initially have somebody grouped into this stereotype and into this group, and then it's peeling those layers back until you can see who they actually are. And
actually, I want to jump off of that for a sec. There's one of the I think underlying themes that's important in this is there's a rich poor gap essentially between the greasers and the socias, but ultimately, like, there's a discussion that Ponyboy and Cherry have where it's like, oh, you watch sunsets too? Oh, you read and everything like that, like poetry or whatever. It's like, beyond the wealth, they're not that different. They're just people. Like, even Ponyboy describes the socias as they're just guys. Like, why is this a thing that's just been ongoing that we hate each other? There's no real difference besides the fact that they have more money than us. That's it. They're just people who go to school and do similar stuff, I guess. I don't know.
And I really like that theme, but they don't get to that theme until they meet Cherry, which is like chapter 5.
They meet Cherry like chapter 2.
No, it's like 2
Yeah.
or 3.
Cherry's like chapter 2. I have a quote from them on like page 28.
Okay.
Yeah, it was early enough in the book. They dive deeper into it later on, but
It's still just like I feel like that theme has it's just shallowy driven. Does that make sense? Like it just feels like, yes, that's the main theme of this book, and for it to be the main theme of this book, they spent very little time on it. There's like 3 key moments that really revolved around that. And
Well,
honestly,
I also don't think that's the main theme of the book.
what do you think the main theme is?
it, like, I mean, literally in the way that Johnny talks to Ponyboy, the whole, like, stay gold, Ponyboy, and, like, the poem that he's also referencing is, like, the nothing gold can stay. I think that's more of the theme. The fact that you got to grow up and realize, like, what you're in right now is not always going to be there. So it's going to be changing, but you got to find the beauty in wherever you are.
I actually didn't think about that. At least not in that way. So,
I mean, yeah, it also shows, like, hey, look, people in different groups are, like, the same, really, but I think that's just, like, a sub-theme.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I could be wrong here,
well,
though.
no, and I think that is a theme that is kind of, I mean, honestly, both themes are kind of on the nose with, I mean, Johnny's dying words and everything, but
it's not a subtle book at all.
It's
No.
not. No.
No.
And it is,
No.
honestly, I think because it's written for, the main age group of people that read this for the first time are eighth grade middle schoolers.
Like coming of age.
At least in America, and the experience that we've all had is, like that coming of age, like you're.
Not really anymore, actually. It's actually been banned in most public schools in the U.S.
Why?
Because of its depiction of gang violence and drug use to minors. No, and I personally,
I mean,
I agree.
Who cares?
Dude, this book is not it. Like, it was written in '67. All right, it's
Well,
an
okay,
older
yeah.
book on older themes that I don't think middle schoolers quite understand. Now, it would be a little different if you're maybe in high school and you can kind of wrap your mind around it a little bit better, and it doesn't seem like it's glorifying these things, but dude, I specifically remember, actually, let me tell the story real quick. I specifically remember when we're reading this in middle school. I was in my English class with my best friend Clay sitting across the way, and we finished it in no, shut up. In a couple hours, and we're kind of bored out of our mind, and we were talking about it afterwards. And some kid at lunch, because that was our third period or whatever, some kid at lunch is like, dude, I kind of want to, like, try a cigarette. Like, that was kind of cool. And I'm like, that book made you want to smoke? What?
I mean,
and
I
it
think
does.
I just
It
wants an excuse.
It glorifies drugs. That bothers me. It really does. I hate it. I don't think middle schoolers should be reading this.
Okay, that's another very interesting debate, because I think I realize it is it is like from kind of a different time period, and it is kind of more of a period piece of when it was written, where people didn't necessarily understand all of the negative effects of smoking and things like that.
Yeah.
But I do not think that in smoking, maybe in particular, it might, but I don't think that it glorifies any of the other gang behavior that goes on. I think there is, because a big part of it in one of the later chapters is, what is the reason that people fight? Why are we fighting? And going along with we're all kind of going through the same stuff. Why? What reason do we have to really fight?
Yeah.
I was going to say the same thing.
Then all the characters go to the fight anyway, especially Pony, who just had a conversation in the back of a car with a Soch. He was like, what's the point of all this? And Pony's like, I'm not going to back down from a fight, and he still goes to the fight anyway.
It's not okay, but that's not.
It's contradictory. It's contradictory to Pony's character.
So
first of all,
what the book is trying to do is start that conversation of what is the reason that we're doing this. It doesn't necessarily hand you an answer, and even the whole stay gold and stay innocent and find what little bit of happiness in your situation that you can. What that is in trying to do, I think, is start that conversation of what is the reason that you do things, and why are you choosing to behave in the way that you are.
And do you genuinely think that middle schoolers can pick up on that and actually understand that?
I think it's a very important... so the reason that you do it in class is so that the teacher can kind of guide them through that and help them with that understanding. If we want to have a conversation about the education system and the way that it honestly is just shit in general, then we can do that. But for this book specifically, I think the purpose of it is to start that conversation. And I do think leaving middle school and going into high school, that is a very important conversation to start, because that's when you start making decisions that will affect the rest of your life.
And that's when those conversations actually start to make sense to you and actually mean something to you. But middle school kids, as someone who has recently, in some of my past jobs, worked a lot closer with middle school and high school kids, there's a massive massive difference in the way that they interpret things and can have conversations. And I really just don't believe middle schoolers should ever be reading something like this and trying to have those conversations, because they're not going to get out of the conversation what needs to be had.
You could at least start it, even if they're not mentally fully prepared. Having the talk before they go into high school, which is when these important decisions are made, I think is important.
And that's what I agree with, because I don't, even for your bit of anecdotal evidence, I'm not saying that one kid
or kids,
I don't even
or
know.
however many kids.
It could be
started
smoking because they read this. I do think there's plenty of other influences that would affect it almost more. I mean, the recent issue that has been going on with Juul is an even greater example of that. The kids that are in middle school and high school that already dip is another example of that. I don't think this one book is going to be a catalyst for somebody really doing that.
But there are better books out there that have better messages that don't portray this kind of thing that can have just as big an impact. I just don't think having a book that is a catalyst to those conversations is necessary for people in middle school who don't quite understand the importance of those decisions yet.
I think starting the conversation earlier will allow people to have that conversation or those questions in mind as they move to being able to process things earlier. And I think that it also, I mean, the fact that we're having this conversation also speaks to how we're preparing kids in general.
True.
And I mean,
lack thereof.
Well, and part of it is that, so Pony Boy in this is what, 14?
14? Yeah, he's 14.
Yeah.
So
which is
very early
is,
high school.
Well, no. So that, for me, 14 was second semester of 8th grade.
Yep.
And freshman year of high school. And so I believe at this point in the story, I think he is in high school. But
right.
I think he is in high school just because of the time of year. But I do also know that, like, going through these kinds of situations, and they are things that real people have to deal with. And it's not saying that, everybody should deal with this.
Yeah.
But it's a reality of the situation that there are parts of the world that are, and even parts of our country that are just not ideal.
Yeah. One thing I will say. Oh, sorry, Kyle.
Well, I was going to say another thing overall is that's kind of it's a big context, like a contextual thing. I think around the time of like 8th grade is when you'll start to see and I mean middle school, high school in general, you'll see like not cliques, but like people will hang out with other people and everything like that. So you'll naturally have these groups of kids that just congregate together. They just all hang out with one another just because they're sports kids or nerds or whatever. It's just there are naturally groups that form in school. So having something like this where there are naturally these two groups, to me makes sense. It's like, oh, there's these two groups, and it's kind of, I don't know. I thought it was a contextual
thing.
And
that is something that you see start to form in middle school as people have different elective focuses. They start to have get more involved with school sports and things like that. Mm-hmm. And it's that transition from middle school to high school that I think starting it early is kind of the thing. But
I just wanted to get that point in there because I had different groups of friends, but I also noticed that there were other groups of friends that I didn't hang out with, but I knew that those groups existed, and they're just there.
Yeah. Well, and I also think it's important to note that this was based off of a true story. So it wasn't something that the author experienced firsthand, but it was a friend of hers that had gone through a similar situation, and that was why she wrote it when she was in high school.
Yeah, she wrote it when she was 15.
Yeah.
The majority of it was 16, but which is very impressive, actually.
No, that's very impressive.
Yeah. It wasn't published until, I think it was on her, at her graduation. But
yeah, she was 18 when it was published.
Yeah.
It's interesting because knowing that, it's kind of like, I don't know if she wrote the book in order, if she wrote it from front to back, because some people will I've dabbled in writing, and I'll write a chapter because I have the outline of the characters and where I want the story to go, and I'll write a chapter because it was the first part of the story that popped in my head, and then I'll go and try and fill the pieces. And she might have done that, but if she wrote it in order, I think that kind of might be a decent explanation for why maybe some of the beginning, the way that the story's told is a little jumbled, not detailed. Why it
kind of like
gets
the fast-paced writing.
yeah,
of
and
like
I mean the book does
young
get
mind.
better as it goes. It definitely
Oh,
does.
yeah.
Well, and it's also important, like, not only in just her age of when she wrote it, but the fact that it was a true story from a secondhand person who was around her same age, that it's like, okay, well, these are moments that are really like, you know, the details of it and the writing of it is very clear and vivid in some instances. And there's a lot of, you know, like you said, there's a lot of detail in some things of like, okay, well, I remember, you know, being passed out because my head was shoved in the fountain and then coming to, and there's just blood everywhere. And then there's, you know, the kind of longer stretches of period where, you know, some of the details are not necessarily hazy, but it's not very detailed. Like the whole time they spend in the church, there's only, you know, like it's one chapter, but it takes up
like 7 days. It's like a week or
5,
two.
yeah, I think it's like five-ish
like
days.
5 days.
But realistically, that's 80% of the timeline.
Yeah.
So it does make sense for that kind of pacing of like, okay, well, I mean, we just spent like 5 days in a church. There's not like
There's
we
not
read
a
Gone
whole
with
lot
the
that
Wind.
could
Yeah,
have
like there was
happened,
some things
you know?
that well, there's not a whole lot that could happen, but it's also like the pacing is a little different there. Or like the, you know, kid's gonna remember the first night that he had a conversation with, you know, Cherry. Like yeah. So it makes sense in that aspect and how there's more detail remembered in that. And I mean, even like we talked about it as a thematic standpoint of, you know, not really having a lot of detail for the Socs, but remembering poignant things like the shirts that they were wearing or the ring that you could feel scarred into your face like that.
Yeah.
Now that you mention it, reading that really does kind of feel like you're being told a story by someone who's just trying to remember it off the top of their head. Like kind of how you, like part of it is where they remember the important details, but the rest of it's just not there anymore.
Yeah. And So if the question is, and it's not necessarily what we're arguing about, if there's better books that can tell a similar story, I don't know any off the top of my head, but I'm sure there are some that exist there. Yeah. However, for this story specifically, I do think the goal of it and the reason that it was written, I do think is something that needs to be kind of, it needs to be commended because I do think it did a good job of fulfilling the purpose that it was trying to give in telling the story about, you know, this young man who was just trying to make it through a week that was garbage.
That was absolute hell.
Yeah, I mean, he ultimately ended up losing 2 of his really close friends and being involved in a murder investigation. So,
Yep.
By the way, I want to ask you guys, when you do your like star rating, so you gave it a 6.8, you gave it a
7.
A 7. Do you guys think of 5 as like an average book where like nothing major
where
happens?
it's just like it's just like middle of the road. Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, so for me, it is that. It's more kind of I'll put it in a, I think.
Yeah.
Because I gave mine a 6 because I don't really think the book by itself is that like impactful. I think it's just a decent read, pretty average. But I think for the age range it's talking to, that's where it's kind of like, hey, open your mind a little bit. Like, think about what you have now, or like go look at the other groups and realize they're not different. I think that is what bumps it up, and the fact that it's taught everywhere kind of says something.
Yeah.
I think that is what bumps it up a little bit. That's why I gave it a 6. Just average, but a little bit extra because of its notoriety, kind of.
Yeah, well, and for me, I put it a little bit higher than that because I did really like the writing of the way that Ponyboy thinks about his family, and kind of has even though the whole book is about him having assumptions about, you know, the Socs and things like that, the way that he also has assumptions about people that he interacts with every day, and just doesn't realize how much they care about him, and what it is that they're actually going through and what their thought process is. I think it spoke to me personally. And so that is why, like, I honestly have not read this book since 8th grade. So
Me
it's
neither.
yeah. So it's been 11 years. Kind of aging myself a little bit.
Yeah,
11
for me
it's
too.
been it's been
At
about
least.
11 years since I've read it. And reading it again, those points still kind of stuck out to me of like, okay, wow.
Yeah, same. That's why I gave it. That's why I said 7. I'm like it for me. There, like you said, there were things that resonated with me, and I was like, oh wow, this makes sense to me because, somewhat similar things have happened or whatever. So, and it did just make me think a little bit back on whatever experiences, and like I said, I enjoyed it because I don't really read for leisure, and it just went super fast. I got sucked in, and I was like, oh wow, I'm done. That was it. I went through it, and I was like, it was good. Nate, you haven't said much recently.
I don't like the book, man. I just don't. It has its moments, and it has some very powerful moments, and I won't try and sit here and say that it doesn't. But the majority of the book just falls flat to me and feels like a sloppily told story, and it bothers me and it causes me to lose interest a couple times.
We just explained why.
And it doesn't matter.
Well, no,
it genuinely doesn't matter. If a story falls flat, you need to write it in a more creative way. That's just my opinion. And yes, this is loosely, and we say that very, very loosely, written and based off of true events. The fact that it's written by a teenage girl is very, very impressive. The beginning is still sloppily written. It takes way too long to really get to the point of the story, and the setup is just not told clearly in a way that is easy to follow what character is what, and it's not until mid to late way through the book that you start to actually understand who all these greasers are and to be able to tell them apart. And that is a major book flaw, a major writing flaw that genuinely just bothers me. And I you can come up with all the excuses in the world for it, but if most audiences, and I remember having this conversation in middle school when we were reading it, and the teacher even saying, hey, you might have to read the first 3 or 4 chapters a couple times because some of it can be a little confusing. Make sure you understand who all the characters are. Like, if you have to do that, that means that it's not written
But
well.
I didn't have to do that.
So that is also, and part of it I think is partially because I had read the book before, and kind of understood the story. So that that again was not something that I had to do. But we've already discussed that.
Right.
So you mentioned that was that kind of the only point of contest of where you would say that it was sloppily written, or are there other examples later in the story?
I mean, that is definitely the biggest one. There are moments, like I said earlier, I think it's a little confusing how Pony goes, and the entire early part of the book, especially when he meets Cherry, is setting up this whole Pony Boy is different, and then he has the opportunity to go sit with, what was it, Bob's friend or who?
Randy. It was Randy.
Yeah,
Who
in
was
the back
Bob's
of a
friend?
car. Yeah. And he's like, I just don't understand the point of this fighting, and Pony's like, yeah, I understand. I relate, and then goes and fights anyway, which is just contradictory to his character and the way that he's set up early on in the story, which I kind of understand what they were trying to do with it of, well, his family's important, this is the way he is, this is the role he's in, and he's angry and hurt that Johnny died. But it just feels like this weird contradictory thing for who he's set up to be early in the story, and it doesn't really make a ton of sense.
Part of it
that kind of bothered me. It just felt out of place.
One of the smaller themes is the cycle of violence, which kind of like you discussed. It's like, yes, they just fight and just violence begets violence, pretty much. And I think part of it is, yes, he understands the fighting goes nowhere, but a lot of it is also because it's his loyalty to his family.
Well, and I think part of the reason that it works for his character is because he is shown to be different and to have those inklings of being different. And throughout the lead up to the fight, he's trying to figure out what the reason that other people fight is. And it says Soda fights because fighting is fun. It's something to do. It's exciting. It's an adrenaline rush. Steve fights because he hates the Socias and doesn't want them there. Derry, who is the oldest brother, fights for pride because he's no longer an athlete and doesn't have that competition in his life anymore. And so he just wants to show that he's got the biggest muscles. Two-Bit fights because it's just what everybody does and it's what people expect from him. And then Pony, I think, is, at this point, I think he doesn't know what it is that he's fighting for. I think similar to Johnny, originally his stance is kind of like, I'll fight if somebody attacks me because I don't want to die and I don't want to get hurt. And I don't want the people around me to get hurt, which is the same reason that Johnny fought back and stabbed Bob, was the whole, they were going to kill you. I had to. Like, it was,
he had no choice.
You have pushed me into a corner. So I think the reason that Pony shows up to the fight and the reason that he's there is because he doesn't have an answer to that question yet. And it's, I don't think it goes against...
bothers me. And, that's just a story flaw for me. It genuinely doesn't make sense to me. You just went through this entire ordeal because Johnny decided to defend you, which I'm not saying that was a bad choice, but he decided to defend you, so you went on the run. You were miserable. You were hungry. You return. You're possibly going to be taken away from your family, and you're set up to be this character who is different, and yet you still go fight. Makes absolutely zero sense to me, and that's just a difference in, that's just a story flaw to me, and it might not be to you, but it genuinely, in no world does that make sense to me. He's a character that's supposed to be different, who is, realizing throughout his relationship with Cherry that, hey, we're not all that different, and then he goes through this entire ordeal that's traumatizing. And you would think, out of that ordeal, you go, oh, maybe this isn't what we should be doing. We are the same. We're similar. And I don't want to go back to being on the run. I don't want more people to die, and more people die. And you're just like, and yet you still go to this fight. That's just a story flaw to me. That makes no sense. That's a character flaw.
It's like Josh said.
It is a character flaw. I agree with you on that. It is a character flaw, but it's also showing a point of vulnerability, of that he is still a 14-year-old kid and doesn't have all the answers. I think it is a character flaw that is almost a strength to the writing. For at the very least, he needs to be there because he feels like it is self-defense still. Because Bob got murdered, the Socias have been rolling up all over Greaser territory and have been attacking them and things like that. And so this was we call the summit. We're just going to have one final out, and we'll see if we win, they stay out of our territory. And it could be it's a win and you're out kind of situation of just like, if the Greasers actually do win here, then we can just not start anything in the future, and by victory we can claim peace. And so that's, I also think that it is the entire way there. He is trying to figure out what the reason that people are fighting for and why he should fight. And he doesn't necessarily have an answer for himself by the time he gets there, and then is kind of drawn into it. And so it's not until after the fight is over, he goes and sees Johnny, and then Johnny dies, and then Derry goes and gets himself killed.
Dally.
Yep.
Dally, sorry. And then Dally gets himself killed.
That chapter confused me, by the way, when they were doing Dally and Derry.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, why would he do that?
A little bit back and forth, yeah. I think that could have been...
Maybe
that could have been handled a little bit better, but I understand how that would work. I think that he doesn't have the answer to... I think if Johnny had died before the fight, then I think he
wouldn't have gone.
His answer would have been different. Yeah, and
he wouldn't have gone.
And his reason would have been different. But it's that... I think that truly is the lowest point for the character. After everything that he's gone through, in everything that
Yeah,
he is. And even though coming back feels like it's an upswing, I don't think it is.
I disagree. I don't think you get lower than seeing your friend dying in the hospital.
Which happens after the fight.
He actually dies after the fight, but you see him physically dying before you go to the fight. And for some reason, it motivated Pony to go partake in the fight.
Maybe he's fighting to
And it
defend.
it is a logic flaw to me. It makes no sense. And
when you're 14 and your best friend is dying in the hospital bed right next to you, when you were also a part of the same incident that took his life and changed it completely, I feel like it is a reasonable idea that you are in there not knowing what to do because you don't really have a good concept of death. You know people die, but you don't know how it affects you. So
I disagree. If my friend's dying, dude, in the hospital, I'm like, maybe
Now.
it wasn't worth it.
Well, like,
No,
yeah.
I'm sorry. And if I were in middle school and I have a friend dying in the hospital and it's because of this big event, this big fight, and we had to go on the run and, we saved a bunch of kids, woohoo, and then, my friend's about to die and there's this big fight, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna stay right here. I'm not going to go partake in this fight. That makes zero logical sense to the type of person that I've been portrayed throughout the entire book to be.
So
It just
my point to that, and I'll just say it one more time because we're
talking in circles.
talking
at
in
this point.
circles.
we are talking in circles, but what you just said goes to that you're questioning it. You're questioning it even harder, and because you don't know what to do, then you're still going to that default setting of, okay, I'll go to the fight, but the entire time I'm questioning, why am I here? Why are we here? Oh shit, I'm in the fight, and then you come to the conclusion that
I'm sorry, but no.
It's like talking to a
okay.
brick.
Yeah,
I-
that it logically makes absolutely zero sense.
I agree with you that it is a character flaw.
It's more
I
than
disagree
a character
with you
flaw.
that
I
it's
think
a
it's
logical
poorly
flaw.
written. It's a logic flaw and it's poorly written. If you were going to have Pony do that, you write his character in a way that he has a character flaw that would actually motivate him to be a part of that fight, A. Or you write the story in a slightly different way that he feels like there's a reason he has to be there. But this whole, we're assuming, because it's not well written, we're assuming that he's having this, oh, I shouldn't be a part of this fight. I should be a part of this fight. But there's no, I should be a part of this fight because my family needs me. I should be a part of this fight because Johnny wants me to be a part of this fight. No, your character's been set up to not really enjoy this type of thing. He doesn't drink. That's been very clearly stated that he's different from the rest of them. And yet, after an ordeal like that, I think if that is the outcome that the writer wanted, I think there was a different way that would have written that to make more sense for his character. It just doesn't make sense to me that Pony would make that decision. We're not going to change each other's minds. We've talked in a circle. So does anyone else have any final points that they would like to make about the book?
I think you just hate fun.
I would like to say my rating is based on the target audience.
Yeah.
And I will say I did not really enjoy going back and reading this book now that I'm older. But I think for the target audience is good. So that's what my rating's for, by the
What
way.
do you think the target audience is? Just
We
curious,
already talked
what
about this.
age?
When a main character is like 14 and it's a coming of age story for the main character, that is the target audience.
Yes.
Coming of age.
Do you see that as a problem?
Do I see that as a problem?
That the age range or the target audience is between 14 and, we'll say, 16?
No, I think it's a good book for them. I know that you were talking about how it's promoting violence. I don't think it's promoting violence. Yeah, there's cigarette mentioned in it, but we all grow up knowing now that it's not good. And yes, if someone gets tempted by that they want to go smoke a cigarette if they're a like middle schooler or something, I think at that point they're going to be more like pushed to do that if they just see a glimpse of it on TV or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't think this book in particular is going to start messing with people or children.
Especially considering most 8th graders don't actually read this.
Yeah.
So
They smart notes
here's
it.
the last
Really?
point I'll make, and then I'm done.
Kyle, did you read every... Well, I already know the answer to this. Did you read every book you were assigned in school?
I read enough of the books. I did Spark Notes a lot of chapters just because I forgot to read or didn't get far enough. But for the most part, yeah, I was good enough about reading.
That's what I'm saying. The kid that... And
I was the goody two shoes in school, man. What are you gonna do?
I think kids are either going to be tempted by something else. It says more to their way that they're parented, or they're probably not the kid that actually read the book anyway. So I
read every book in
did
school except for Lord of the Flies, and I didn't read that book purely because of a challenge that my friend made with me, and he said, I bet you can't get A's without reading a single page of this book.
Did you?
Well, it's a good thing we didn't pick Lord of the Flies, by the way,
alright, well,
because
Nathaniel
I
is-
absolutely hate that book. But that's another, that's another time.
Nathaniel has been pre-gaming for Bullshitter since he was in middle school.
Yeah. I just want to point out one last thing. So this book, The Outsiders, is ranked 38 on the American Library Association's top 100 most frequently challenged books. It's been banned in most public school libraries because of its portrayal of gang violence, underage smoking, drinking, strong language, and family dysfunction. The biggest reason I could see for this being banned in most public schools is for kids going through similar abusive families, family struggles, things, and it genuinely bothering them.
I think that would just give them something to relate to.
Yeah, no. I would see more reasons why people would ban this would be some woke parent, using that in quotes, is like, oh, look, this kid's going to get violent because of a violent book, like how they say that kids will get violent because of violent TV or violent because of
Or video
games. Yeah.
It's all an argument that shows that it's not really the case. I think it's just that same reason. And the fact that it has been taught for many years now. It's probably the parents coming up that had to read the book in middle school and thought it was just a bad book or something.
Yeah. I mean, I won't say that that's not
I've
part
read-
of it.
I've
And also,
better
either
books,
way, for
but-
me, it's like my rating isn't based on whether or not it is banned in schools or should be taught in schools. I still think overall it is a good book for the age audience.
Well, and it
Or an average.
One of the things noted there was dysfunctional families. I think that it does a good job of showing dysfunctional families on both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Because there is, I mean, I'm not necessarily claiming that Ponyboy's family itself is highly functional. Because, I mean, clearly it's not.
Yeah.
Nope.
But I do think that there is also dysfunction in the Socius families. And I mean, even, what was it?
Was it Bob or Randy?
It was Bob or Randy that said, give me 1 second. Let me look through my notes.
I think it was.
It was Randy that said, if his old man had belted him just once, he might still be alive.
Oh, about Bob. Okay,
Yeah,
About
when he was
Bob.
talking
because
about
his
it
Bob.
was
parents
like
never
if
said
all-
no to him.
Yeah, all he
Yeah.
was really looking for was somebody to say no. And so, I mean, it shows dysfunction in, I mean, even a wealthy family that
Yeah.
supposedly has everything. That even, any kid can get into trouble if they don't have the right outlook on life. So I think at this point I've probably raised all the arguments that I have. I think Nathaniel is kind of dead set on not having enjoyed the book.
Yeah. Let's just go around. If you have a point you would like to reward, we can. I mean, you guys were all kind of similarly on the same side. So if there was just a point, I am rewarding a point, but you didn't change my mind. I still hate the book. But I think I'm giving my point to Josh. The point of the way that some of the scenes are a little bit more descriptive as others because this is a second-hand told story. I think that does kind of give a little bit of leeway I have for maybe some of the scenes that just felt empty, some of the scenes that were just kind of like, okay, well, that was kind of weirdly written compared to other scenes. Like, very descriptive scenes of like the fight and the what's happening when they're saving the kids from the fire, and the first fight where Johnny got beat up, and those are really vivid scenes that are great scenes. And then some other parts are just kind of like, okay, that was weirdly written, weirdly told. So yeah, I think that kind of gives a little explanation to that, and is a good way to kind of, I guess, offset some of those weird moments.
I am actually going to change my rating of the book. I'm going to give it to Kyle. I think I will match your 7.2. I do recognize some of the flaws that Nathaniel pointed out.
Up a whopping 0.2.
0.4, sweetheart.
Oh, I thought you were 6.8.
Yeah, 6.8 to 7.2. That's 0.4.
I said
He's
7.
Oh, you're 7.
Yeah, I said 7.
All right, I'm going to pull it up to a 7.2, but Kyle was still the one.
Let's go. I still get a point.
No, and I think it was for me, like I said, it's been a really long time since I read this book, and I will admit, I apologize to my 8th grade teacher, did not really read the book and have like I read parts of the book, and I think that's noted. We all shared the same copy of the book that I had since middle school, where I underlined some things in some chapters as I was reading it, but then there were complete parts of the book that just had no markings on it. I didn't really fully read the book until about 2 weeks ago. And so...
Was it 2? Was it that long ago, really?
For this episode, I did not really read the book.
Right. Okay.
I did not really read the book until it was for this episode.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was again in one sitting. My timeline was a little bit off from Kyle's. It did take me 4 hours, but it was like 10 p.m. to 2 in the morning because I'm that kind of person.
If it works, it works.
But it was something that still kind of connected with me, and finding the joy in the moments that you can and where you are, and enjoying the people around you, despite their flaws, and realizing that everybody else in the world is going through their own problems and their own struggles, and you can't always claim victimhood.
Yep.
And so I think that is a really important thing for especially a younger audience to understand, and I think really would have done me justice if I had read it, actually read it when I was supposed to.
Yeah.
Especially immediately after that, moving to Tennessee and being an other.
Yeah.
So
I will say I'll give mine a rise from 4.2 to 4.4.
Oh shit. We did it.
Oh man. Oh god, oh man.
Teddy?
All right. I'm glad he said 4.2, or you gave it a rose, because I forgot exactly what you had put.
Rated.
He didn't really push it that much higher.
I didn't get a big reaction or emotional connection from the book both times I read it, even in middle school. I just thought overall it was a good book, or more it's a book. You kind of enjoy it, you kind of don't, unless it really something stands out. You don't think about it that much after. And that's this book. I didn't really think much. So it's not I really want to rise it up to a 6.8 or something, but I also don't want to dog on it either. So it's kind of the score I relate still, I think, the most to is my own, but I also don't want to be that guy. I don't want to just not award him a point.
You can,
I
was that guy.
It's up to you. You can do it.
If you thought people truly did not change your mind or did not present good arguments, then you don't have to give out a point. But if you think somebody presented good arguments and...
That's what I was about to go to.
Okay.
I think for presenting good arguments in terms of just debate for this, I think Josh would get my point. I don't agree with the final score per se, but I think it was just you, Josh, and Nathaniel going back and forth. I was just sitting here watching it, and I realized halfway through I wasn't saying anything.
Same.
And I'm oh, wait, I'm supposed to be talking.
Teddy's wait, I'm supposed to have an argument.
Yeah.
Crap.
Feel free to raise your
Crap.
hand or interrupt.
Yeah.
Well, not necessarily interrupt, but raise your hand and call the next point of action
Yeah.
But anyways,
in the future.
So you're going to stick with your 6?
yeah, I'm sticking with my 6, but
Not
Josh
even
will get the point.
5.9 or 6.1?
Oh, why would I change it at this point?
You don't have
that
to.
doesn't do anything.
I'm teasing.
Realistically, it
I'm
doesn't do anything.
teasing. Yeah, I'm teasing.
Well, realistically, our scores don't really matter
Yeah,
at all.
No, they don't.
The points absolutely
The points
matter.
absolutely matter. However, we are not telling you how to think.
Yeah, exactly. I will keep my score of a 7. Like I said, I'm a very easy person to please. It was a good read, just quick, easy. For me, I resonated with some of the characters more than obviously my counterpart over here to my left. I will also give my point to Josh because of some points he brought up that I did not previously think of.
I appreciate that.
I got you.
Huh. Okay. So I guess that is Josh. What, 3? That's 3 points to Josh.
That is 3 points to me, and then 1 point to Kyle.
1 point to Kyle. All right,
I'm
Teddy.
on the board.
We suck.
Yeah, we do.
All right. Well, that is it for our Monday Parlay episode, our special book episode of the month. We will see you guys on Wednesday when we talk about our historically accurate Halloween monsters.
Spooky.
All right.
Thanks
bye.
for listening, guys.
Well, that's it for today's episode. Be sure to join us on the next episode where we will continue to debate as good friends do. Follow us on Instagram and YouTube and stay up to date on all things Asshat, and to participate in polls and activities throughout the week based on the themes of the upcoming episodes.
We also started a Patreon for those of you who are interested in showing your support in a more direct way. On our Patreon, we have a ton of bonus content, including tier lists, loser dinners, and bonus podcast episodes.
We want to continue making content that makes you think, smile, and especially laugh. And the best way that you guys can help us do that, leave a like or a comment, download and share all these episodes with your friends and family members who you think would enjoy our tomfoolery, our shenanigans, and all those other crazy words that encapsulate our content.